I never imagined that the quiet after my wife's passing would be shattered this way, not by strangers, but by my own family. It started small, so small I almost convinced myself I was imagining it, a drawer slightly out of place mail, already opened before I touched it. The faint scent of perfume, that wasn't mine. Lingering in my living room, long after I'd been out all day. Then it became impossible to ignore my daughter-in-law, began treating my apartment like an extension of her own life, coming and going as she pleased, touching what she wanted, deciding what I should or should not keep, when I finally confronted her calmly, carefully. She didn't apologize, she laughed. She told me I was overreacting, that I was lonely, that I should be grateful someone cared enough to check on me. My son stood right beside her and said nothing, that silence hurt more than her words. I realized then that I was no longer a father to be respected, but an inconvenience to be managed. So I stopped arguing, I stopped pleading. I stopped explaining myself. Instead, I did something they never expected. I disappeared from their reach, without warning, without drama, without a single goodbye. What happened a week later in the middle of the night would force them to face consequences they never believed could touch them. This is not just a story about betrayal or humiliation or revenge. It is a story about patience, about knowing when to step back, and about how quiet decisions can lead to the loudest justice. Stay with me, because the truth of what happened next turned their world upside down, and the ending was more satisfying than they could ever imagine. My name is Richard Lawson. I am 68 years old, a retired civil engineer who spent 40 years designing bridges and highways across New England. I built things meant to last, concrete and steel that would outlive me by generations. But the structure I cared about most was my family. And 2 years ago, when my wife Eleanor passed away, I learned that some foundations crack no matter how carefully you build them. The morning after she died, I made coffee in the same mug I had used for 30 years, a faded blue ceramic with the words, "World's Okayest Husband," printed on the side. Eleanor bought it as a joke for our 20th anniversary. I hated it at first. Now I cannot imagine drinking from anything else. That first morning alone, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at her empty chair, waiting for her to shuffle in. Wearing her old robe, complaining about the cold. She never came. She would never come again. But I still made enough coffee for two. Grief, I discovered, is not a storm that passes. It is a river that runs beneath everything, quiet most days, but always there. I didn't drown in it. Eleanor would not have wanted that. Instead, I learned to live alongside it, to let the current carry me forward even when I wanted to stand still. I kept her white lilies on the windowsill and watered them every morning the way she used to. I took walks through the neighborhood at 7 or 0, nodding to the same faces, following the same route we had walked together for decades. I ate dinner at 6, read until 9, and slept on my side of the bed, leaving hers untouched. My life became a series of rituals, small acts of remembrance that kept her close without letting sorrow consume me. Eleanor had always been the planner in our marriage. She organized everything: holidays, finances, even the order of spices in the kitchen cabinet. She used to joke that if she ever left me, I would starve within a week because I would not know where she kept the pasta. She was probably right. After she passed, I found notes tucked into drawers and folders, little instructions she had written just in case: how to restart the water heater, which neighbor had a spare key, the name of her favorite florist for when I favorite. Inevitably forgot our anniversary in heaven. She had prepared for everything, even her own absence. She even wrote birthday cards for me, weeks in advance, sealed and dated so I would have something to open. Each year I found the first one 3 months after the funeral hidden in her jewelry box. I sat on the edge of our bed and cried for an hour. There was one envelope I never opened. It sat in the back of her drawer behind the jewelry box, unmarked and slightly yellowed. I noticed it a few times while searching for other things. But something always stopped me. Perhaps I was not ready. Perhaps I was afraid of what she might have written. Some messages are meant to be read at the right moment, and I had learned to trust Eleanor's timing even from beyond my son. Daniel visited occasionally, always with his wife, Vanessa. They came as a pair, never separately, and I told myself this was normal. Married couples do things together, but I noticed that Daniel rarely spoke when Vanessa was in the room she filled. The silence for both of them asking about my health, my medications, my daily schedule. She wanted to know if I was eating well, sleeping well, managing my bills. Her concern seemed genuine, wrapped in soft words and sympathetic smiles, but sometimes, when she thought I was not looking, I caught her glancing around the apartment with an expression I could not quite name. It was not worry. It was something else. Something that made me uneasy in a way I could not explain. I dismissed it as paranoia. She was my daughter-in-law. She was family. What reason would she have to be anything but kind? That Thursday morning, I left for my walk at 7:00 sharp, locking the door behind me the way I always did. I checked the handle twice, a habit Eleanor used to tease me about. The air was crisp, the sidewalks damp from overnight rain, and I followed my usual route past the park and back. When I returned 40 minutes later, I reached for my keys and stopped. The door was unlocked. I stood there for a long moment, hand hovering over the knob, trying to remember if I had forgotten. But I had not forgotten. I never forgot someone had been inside my home. I stepped inside, slowly scanning the room for anything out of place. The apartment looked the same as I had left it. The coffee mug sat in the drying rack. The morning newspaper lay folded on the table. Eleanor's lilies stood undisturbed on the windowsill, their white petals catching the light. Nothing seemed wrong, and yet everything felt different. There was a faint trace of perfume in the air, something floral and unfamiliar gone almost as soon as I noticed it. I told myself I was imagining things old men imagine things. But the door had been unlocked, and I had not unlocked it. Over the following weeks, the small disturbances multiplied. I would leave a drawer closed and return to find it slightly ajar. I would place the television remote on the left side of the coffee table, and later it would be on the right. My mail arrived already open, the envelope slit cleanly along the top, as if by a letter opener I didn't own. At first I blamed myself. Memory plays tricks after a certain age. And I was not too proud to admit that I occasionally forgot where I put my reading glasses or whether I'd taken my morning pills. But these were different. These felt deliberate, as if someone was rearranging the pieces of my life, just enough to make me doubt my own mind. The photo frame bothered me most. Eleanor and I had taken a photograph on our 40th anniversary, standing in front of the old lighthouse in Maine where we spent our honeymoon. I kept it on the shelf beside my chair, angled so I could see your face. When I sat down to read, one evening I noticed the frame had moved it. Now faced the wall, Eleanor's smile hidden from view. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I had turned it myself. I had not, I was certain. But certainty felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. When Daniel and Vanessa visited that Sunday, I considered mentioning the disturbances, but before I could speak, Vanessa was already talking, filling the room with questions about my health and my schedule and whether I had remembered to refill my prescriptions. She moved through my kitchen as if it belonged to her, opening cabinets, checking expiration dates, clucking her tongue at a carton of milk that was 2 days past its prime. "Dad, I noticed some of your mail was piling up," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "I hope you don't mind, but I opened a few envelopes just to make sure you weren't missing any bills at your age. It's easy to overlook things." I felt the words land like small stones against my chest. At your age, she said it so casually, as if my 68 years had erased my ability to manage my own affairs. I had built bridges that would stand for a century. I had managed budgets larger than her annual salary. And now she was opening my mail because she worried I might forget to pay the electric Bill, I appreciate the concern, I said, carefully, but I would prefer to handle my own correspondence. Vanessa smiled the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. Of course, Dad. I was just trying to help. You know how much we worry about you living here all alone. I looked at Daniel, hoping he might say something. He sat on the couch, hands folded in his lap, staring at a spot on the carpet. He did not meet my eyes. He did not speak. When Vanessa finished her sentence, he nodded slightly as if agreeing with the statement he had not heard. I realized then that I could not remember the last time my son had visited without his wife. Every conversation, every meal, every holiday, Vanessa was always there speaking for both of them, filling silences before Daniel could fill them himself. Daniel, I said, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Before he could answer, Vanessa appeared at his side, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Is everything okay, Dad? You can tell us both we're family. Daniel glanced up at me, then quickly looked away. There was something in his expression I had not seen before. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it. Discomfort, avoidance. The look of a man who knew more than he was willing to say, "It's nothing I said. Never mind after they left." I sat alone in the silence, turning the conversation over in my mind. I wanted to believe that Vanessa's attention came from a place of love. I wanted to believe my son's silence was simply shyness or deference to his wife, or the awkwardness that sometimes grows between fathers and sons. But the unlocked door, the opened mail, the moved photograph, these were not accidents. Someone was entering my home without permission, and the only people with a reason to do so were the only family I had left that night. I went to Eleanor's drawer to look at her letters. I had saved every card and note she ever wrote me bundled together with a pale blue ribbon she had worn in her hair on our wedding day. I kept them in the same order she had written them, chronological, a paper timeline of our love. When I opened the drawer, the ribbon was untied. The letters were scattered, some facing the wrong direction. Others clearly moved from their original positions. Someone had read them. Someone had held my wife's words in their hands without my permission, had touched the private memories I guarded more carefully than anything else I owned. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letters trembling in my fingers, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This was not forgetfulness. This was not paranoia. Someone was searching through my life, and I did not yet know why I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling around me, and tried to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps I had untied the ribbon myself and forgotten. Perhaps the letters had shifted when I opened the drawer too quickly. But I knew these were lies I was telling myself to avoid a harder truth. Someone had violated the most sacred space I had left, the place where Eleanor still lived, in ink and paper, and I could no longer pretend it was an accident. The next morning, I called Daniel and asked him to come over alone. I emphasized the word twice, and there was a pause on the other end of the line before he agreed. When he arrived 3 hours later, Vanessa was with him. She smiled at me from the doorway, as if her presence was the most natural thing in the world, as if I had not specifically requested privacy with my own son. "I hope you don't mind," she said, stepping inside before I could respond. "Daniel mentioned you wanted to talk, and I thought it might be helpful if we were both here. Family discussions are better when everyone's involved. Don't you think I didn't think that?" But I let them in anyway because refusing would have created a confrontation I was not yet ready to have. We sat in the living room, Vanessa on the couch beside Daniel, me in my chair across from them. The photograph of Eleanor and me at the lighthouse had been turned back to face the room. I did not remember moving it. "I need to ask you something," I said, looking directly at Daniel, "and I need you to answer honestly." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa placed her hand on his knee, a gesture that might have looked supportive, but felt like a warning. Who has been entering my apartment? The question hung in the air. Daniel's eyes flickered toward Vanessa, then back to the carpet. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Dad, Vanessa began, I'm not sure what you mean. We visit when we can, but we always... I'm asking Daniel. My voice was firmer than I intended, but I did not apologize. I kept my eyes on my son, waiting. He looked like a man caught between two opposing forces, unable to move in either direction. Finally, he spoke. I gave Vanessa a spare key. He said quietly a few months ago so she could check on you. When we were worried, the words landed with more weight than he probably intended. A spare key given without my knowledge, without my permission, to someone who is not. My child, I thought about all the small disturbances, the open mail, the moved photograph, the scattered letters. I thought about the unlocked door, the faint perfume, the feeling of being watched in my own home. It had been Vanessa all along, coming and going as she pleased, treating my apartment like an extension of her own. You gave her a key to my home, I said slowly, and you didn't think to ask me first. Daniel's face flushed. I was trying to help Dad. You're alone now, and we worry what if something happened to you. What if you fell and couldn't reach the phone? Then you would call, or you would knock, or you would ask me if I wanted someone to have access to my private space. I heard my voice rising and forced myself to stay calm. This is not about a key, Daniel. This is about respect. You made a decision about my life without including me in it. You gave your wife permission to enter my home whenever she wanted, and you never once thought to mention it. Vanessa leaned forward, her expression shifting into something softer, more sympathetic. Dad, please don't be upset. We were only trying to look out for you. You're 68 years old living alone. It's natural for family to want to make sure you're safe there. It was again 68 years old, as if my age was a disease that stripped away my right to privacy, my ability to make decisions, my dignity as a man who had lived nearly 7 decades without needing supervision. I want the key back, I said. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me, the key? I want. It returned today. She glanced at Daniel, who said nothing. Then she smiled, the same smile she always wore, the one that never quite reached her eyes. Of course, Dad. I completely understand. I'll bring it by next time we visit. Not next time now? Another pause. Vanessa's smile flickered just for a moment before settling back into place. I don't have it with me. I left it at home, but I promise I'll return it soon. I didn't believe her, but I let it go. Pressing further would only create more resistance, and I needed time to think. Instead, I set a boundary I hoped they would honor from now on. I said I would appreciate it if you called before coming over. I don't like surprises, of course, Vanessa said smoothly. Whatever makes you comfortable, Dad. Daniel nodded along, still avoiding my eyes. They left 20 minutes later, full of reassurances and promises that felt as thin as paper. I watched them drive away and knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that nothing would change. Vanessa would keep the key. She would keep coming, and Daniel would keep silent, caught in a web he had helped weave, but could not escape that night. I checked every lock in the apartment twice. I examined the windows, tested the deadbolt, and placed a chair against the door before going to bed. Then I took a small notebook from my desk, the kind I used to carry on job sites for quick calculations, and opened it to the first page. I wrote the date at the top. Below it, I wrote a single word. Tuesday. It was the day I had discovered Eleanor's letters disturbed it. Was the day I stopped trusting my son's wife. And it was the beginning of something I did not yet fully understand. A week passed before the key was returned. Vanessa dropped it off on a Sunday afternoon, pressing it into my palm with a smile that suggested she was doing me a great favor. She did not apologize, for the delay. She did not acknowledge that the key should never have been made in the first place. She simply handed it over and said, "There you go, Dad." Happy now, I was not happy. But I thanked her anyway, because that is what polite people do. And I had spent my entire life being polite. I put the key in my pocket and told myself the matter was closed. I wanted to believe that boundaries once stated would be respected. I wanted to believe that my son's wife, whatever her flaws, would honor a simple request from a man who had never asked for much. I was wrong. The following Thursday, I returned from my morning walk to find the scent of fresh coffee in the air. I had not made coffee before leaving. I checked the kitchen and found a clean mug in the drying rack, still warm to the touch. Someone had been here. Someone had used my coffee maker, drunk from my cups, and left before I returned. I stood in the middle of my own kitchen and felt a familiar chill crawl up my spine. The key was in my pocket. The locks had not been changed, which meant either Vanessa had made a copy before returning the original, or she had found another way inside. I called Daniel that evening and asked to speak with both of them. This time, I did not request privacy. I knew Vanessa would come regardless, and I wanted to confront her directly with witnesses so there could be no misunderstanding about what I was asking. They arrived together as always. Vanessa wore a concerned expression that I now recognized as performance, a mask she put on whenever she wanted to appear. Caring. Daniel looked tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a weight you cannot put down. They sat across from me in the living room, and I did not offer them coffee. I need to be clear about something. I said, keeping my voice steady, I do not want anyone entering my apartment without my knowledge or permission, not to check on me, not to help with bills, not for any reason. If you are worried about my safety, you can call. If I do not answer, you can contact the building manager, but I do not want anyone walking into my home while I'm not here. Vanessa tilted her head, a gesture of exaggerated confusion. Dad? What are you talking about? I gave the key back. I haven't been here since someone made coffee in my kitchen this morning. I did not make it. She laughed, not a nervous laugh, not an embarrassed laugh, but a dismissive one. The kind of laugh you might give a child who insists there are monsters under the bed, Dad. You're being overly sensitive. Maybe you made it and forgot that happens at your age there. It was, again, at your age. The phrase she used like a weapon, designed to make me doubt myself, to convince me that my perceptions could not be trusted. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but kept my expression neutral. I did not forget, I said. I know what I did and did not do this morning. Of course you do, she said, her tone dripping with false reassurance. I'm just saying we're family. This is what family does. We look out for each other. If I did stop by, which I didn't, it would only be because I care about you. I turned to Daniel. He stood beside his wife, hands in his pockets, staring at a point, somewhere above my left shoulder. He would not meet my eyes. Daniel? I said, do you have anything to say? He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I watched him struggle. Watched the conflict play out across his face for a moment. I thought he might actually speak up, might actually defend his father against the slow erosion of his dignity. But the moment passed. She means well. Dad, he said quietly. We both do. The silence that followed hurt more than Vanessa's laughter. My own son. The boy I had raised, the man I had supported through college and career and marriage, could not find the words to stand beside me. He had chosen his wife's convenience over his father's peace of mind, and he did not even have the courage to admit it. Vanessa broke the silence with a question that caught me off guard, by the way. Dad, do you need any help managing your finances? I've been thinking about it, and with everything you have to keep track of, it might be easier if someone assisted you. Daniel's been stressed about money lately, and I thought, Maybe we could all help each other. I saw Daniel flinch at the mention of money. His jaw tightened, and for just a second something flashed in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or shame. He recovered quickly. But I always noticed 40 years of reading blueprints and spotting structural weaknesses had taught me to see what others missed. I am perfectly capable of managing my own finances, I said firmly. Thank you for the offer, but I do not need assistance. Vanessa smiled and let the subject drop, but the question lingered in my mind long after they left. Why would she ask about my finances? Why would Daniel flinch at the word money? There was something beneath the surface, something they were not telling me, but I did not have enough information to understand what it was. That night I sat at my desk with the notebook I had started keeping. I turned to a fresh page and began writing in earnest. I recorded the date, the time I had left for my walk, the time I had returned, and what I had found: the warm mug, the smell of coffee, the feeling of violation that had become my constant companion. I documented every detail I could remember, every small disturbance from the past weeks, every instance where something felt wrong, even if I could not prove it at the bottom of the page. I wrote a single sentence in capital letters: if I am overreacting, prove it. It was a challenge to myself as much as to anyone else. I would keep records, I would gather evidence, and when the time came, I would know whether I was a paranoid old man or a victim of something I had not yet named. 6 months, 27 entries. I filled page after page in the notebook, each line a record of violation, each date a proof that I was not imagining things. The pattern became undeniable once I had enough data to see it. Vanessa came during my morning walks, almost always between 7:15 and 7:45. She stayed 20 to 40 minutes, never longer. She focused on specific areas: my desk, my filing cabinet, the drawer where I kept important documents. She was not checking on my health. She was not watering plants or tidying up out of kindness. She was searching for something methodically, repeatedly, and she believed I would never notice. I began varying my routine to test the pattern. Some mornings I left earlier than usual, other mornings I returned by a different route, cutting through the back entrance of the building to avoid being seen from the street. The entries continued regardless. Vanessa had learned my habits well enough to predict my movements, but she had not anticipated that I would start watching hers. The confirmation came from an unexpected source. Susan Whitmore lived 3 doors down from me, a 70-year-old widow who had known Eleanor for decades. We had never been close, but we shared the quiet camaraderie of people who had outlived their spouses and learned to fill the silence alone one afternoon. She knocked on my door with a plate of cookies and an expression that told me she had not come just to be neighborly. "Richard," she said, settling into the chair I offered, "I need to tell you something, and I hope you won't think I'm meddling." I assured her I would not. "I've seen her," Susan said, lowering her voice as if Vanessa might be listening through the walls. "Your daughter-in-law almost every morning when you leave for your walk. She comes in through the main entrance, lets herself into your apartment, and stays for half an hour or so. I thought maybe you knew. Maybe you had asked her to check on things? But then I saw your face last week when you came back early, and I knew. Something was wrong." I sat very still, absorbing her words. Part of me had hoped I was wrong, that there was some explanation I had overlooked. Susan's confirmation destroyed that hope. She has her own key. Susan continued, "I've seen her use it. She doesn't knock. She doesn't call first. She just walks in like she owns the place." She paused, her weathered hands folded tightly in her lap. "You're the most decent man I know, Richard." "Whatever she's doing, it's not right." I thanked Susan for telling me. She left shortly after, and I sat alone with the weight of what she had confirmed: 27 unauthorized entries witnessed by a neighbor who had no reason to lie. This was not paranoia. This was not age-related confusion. This was a sustained invasion of my privacy, and I needed to decide what to do about it. The next day, I took a bus to an electronics store on the other side of town. I did not want to shop anywhere. Vanessa might see me anywhere. Word might get back to Daniel. I spent an hour browsing the aisles asking questions, comparing options. When I left, I carried a small bag containing something that fit easily in my coat pocket, the receipt I tucked into my notebook, along with a print out of my state's tenant rights and the legal definition of criminal trespass. I was not yet ready to act, but I wanted to be prepared when the time came. The following Sunday, Daniel and Vanessa visited for dinner. I had ordered takeout rather than cook, a small economy of effort that Vanessa immediately criticized Dad. "You should be eating home-cooked meals," she said. Picking at the container of lo mein with evident distaste, "Takeout is full of sodium. It's not good for someone your age." I let the comment pass without response. I'd learned that arguing with Vanessa only gave her more ammunition, more opportunities to paint me as stubborn or confused or difficult. Better to stay silent and let her reveal herself. She waited until we had finished eating to deliver what I now believe was the true purpose of the visit. She reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of glossy brochures, spreading them across my dining table like a hand of cards. "I've been doing some research," she said brightly, "and I think it might be time to consider other living arrangements. These assisted living facilities are wonderful. They have activities, medical staff on site, people your own age to socialize with. You wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or maintaining this big apartment all by yourself." I looked at the brochures, sunny photographs of smiling seniors, promises of care and community and peace of mind, and beneath it all, the unspoken message: you are too old to live alone. You are too old to be trusted. Give us control, and we will take care of everything. I looked at my son. He would not meet my eyes. I did not respond to the brochures. I gathered them into a neat pile, thanked Vanessa for her concern, and showed them to the door with the practiced politeness of a man who had run out of words. Daniel mumbled something about calling later in the week. Vanessa reminded me to think seriously about my options. I closed the door behind them and stood in the silence of my apartment. Feeling the walls pressing around me that night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed replaying the conversation, turning each word over in my mind, like stones in a tumbler. Assisted living activities, people your own age, as if I were a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed, an inconvenience that would be easier to handle if I simply disappeared into a facility where someone else could worry about me. I had built bridges that would stand for generations. I had raised a son, buried a wife, survived losses that would have broken weaker men. And now my daughter-in-law was handing me brochures as if I were no longer capable of deciding where to live. Sometime after midnight, I got out of bed and went to Eleanor's drawer. I had avoided the envelope for 2 years, telling myself I was not ready. Telling myself there would be a right moment, but the right moment had never come. And I was tired of waiting for permission to read my own wife's words. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, sealed with the care Eleanor brought to everything she did. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the slight weight of something inside beyond just paper. My name was written on the front in her familiar handwriting. The loops and curves I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and love notes left on my pillow during our 43 years together. I ran my finger along the letters, tracing the shape of her presence one last time. Then I opened it. Inside, I found 2 things. The first was her old library card, laminated and worn from years of use. Eleanor had loved the library more than almost anywhere else. She used to say that books were the only thing worth hoarding, the only possessions that gave back more than they took. We had spent countless Saturday afternoons wandering the stacks together, she searching for novels, I pretending to browse while really just watching. Her face light up each time she found something new. The card was a simple memento, but holding it felt like holding a piece of our life together, a reminder of who we had been before illness and loss and time had changed everything. The second item was a letter written on the pale blue stationery she kept in her desk. I unfolded it slowly, afraid of what I might find. Afraid of what I might feel. Her handwriting was slightly uneven. The letters formed with effort, and I realized she must have written this near the end when her strength was fading, but her mind remained sharp. I read the words once, then again, then a third time, each reading cutting deeper than the last. Richard, if you're reading this, you're probably feeling alone. I know our son loves you, but I also know our daughter-in-law. I've seen how she looks at our apartment, at what we've built. I've watched her calculate the value of things that should have no price. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that after I was gone, she would treat you with the respect you deserve. But if you're reading this letter, I suspect my hopes were misplaced. Don't let anyone take your dignity. You have spent your whole life being kind, being patient, being the man who keeps the peace, even when peace costs too much. But there are some things worth more than peace. Your self-respect is one of them. Your right to live on your own terms is another. If your boundaries are violated, walk away. Don't explain. Don't beg for understanding. Don't waste your breath on people who have already decided not to hear you. Just walk away. You owe no one an apology for protecting yourself. I believe in you. I always have. And wherever I am now, I'm still believing in you. All my love forever. And after Eleanor, I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter trembling in my hands, and felt something break open inside me. The tears came without warning, the first I had shed since the day we buried her. I cried for Eleanor, who had seen the truth and tried to warn me. I cried for Daniel, the son I had raised, who could not find the courage to stand beside his father. I cried for myself, for the months I had spent doubting my own perceptions, wondering if I was paranoid, wondering if I was losing my mind. I had been so afraid of conflict, so desperate to preserve what remained of my family, that I had sacrificed the very thing Eleanor had asked me to protect: my dignity, my boundaries, my right to live without apology. I do not know how long I sat there. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollowed out but strangely clear, as if a fog had lifted, and I could see the landscape of my life for the first time in months. Eleanor had known, she had always known, and she had prepared this letter like a lighthouse, waiting for the moment when I would need its light to find my way home. I walked to the living room and stood before her photograph, the one from our 40th anniversary, the one Vanessa had turned to face the wall. I looked at Eleanor's face, at the smile I had loved for more than 4 decades, and I spoke to her as if she could hear me. "You were right," I whispered. "I've been a fool." The apartment was silent, but I could have sworn I felt something shift in the air, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. I picked up my phone from the coffee table and opened my messages. My fingers hovered over the screen for a long moment. Then I began to type the message. I typed was simple. I did not explain my reasons or justify my decision. I did not apologize for the inconvenience it might cause. I wrote exactly what I meant, and nothing more. I'm changing the locks on my apartment from now on. Please do not enter when I'm not present. If you need to see me, call first. I sent it to both Daniel and Vanessa, then set the phone down on the table and waited. Eleanor's letter lay beside me, her words still echoing in my mind. Don't explain, don't beg for understanding, just walk away. I had spent 6 months explaining, 6 months hoping that reasonable requests would be met with reasonable compliance. That approach had failed. Now I would try something different. Now I would act. The phone rang. Within 3 minutes, Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, giving myself time to steady my breathing, to prepare for whatever came next. "Dad, what is this about?" Her voice was sharp. The false sweetness stripped away. "Don't you trust us after everything we've done for you?" I had anticipated this question. I had rehearsed my response in my head while typing the message, knowing she would try to reframe the conversation to make it about trust or gratitude or family obligation. I did not take the bait. "This isn't about trust," I said calmly. "This is about boundaries." "Boundaries? We're your family, Dad." "We don't need boundaries. We need to know you're safe." "I am safe. I'm also entitled to privacy in my own home." She tried again, her tone shifting between wounded and accusatory. She asked if someone had been filling my head with ideas she suggested I was being influenced by neighbors who did not understand our family dynamics. She reminded me of all the times she had checked on me, all the times she had made sure I was eating properly and taking my medications. Each argument was designed to make me feel ungrateful, unreasonable, difficult. I listened without interrupting when she finally paused to draw a breath. "I have made my decision, please respect it." Then I hung up. It was the first time in my life I had ever ended a call with family. My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down, but beneath the tremor, I felt something unexpected relief. I had drawn a line, I had spoken clearly and without equivocation. Whatever came next, I had done what Eleanor asked. I had protected my dignity. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had new locks installed on both doors. I paid in cash and kept the receipt. Then I drove to Daniel's house, hoping to speak with him alone, to explain my decision in person. Before Vanessa could poison the conversation, I wanted to give my son a chance to understand, to choose his father over his wife's displeasure, even if only for a moment. When I arrived, Vanessa's car was in the driveway. I sat in my own car for several minutes, debating whether to knock anyway. Through the front window, I could see shadows moving. And when I rolled down my window, I heard voices drifting from somewhere inside the house. The words were indistinct, muffled by walls and distance, but the tone was clear. They were arguing about what I could not say. But I heard my name mentioned once, sharp and accusatory, followed by a long silence. I decided not to knock. Whatever conversation was happening inside my presence would only make it worse. Daniel needed space to process what I had done, to decide for himself whether he would support his father or side with his wife, forcing a confrontation. Now would only push him further into Vanessa's corner. I would return another day when the emotions had cooled, when we could speak without her shadow looming over us. I drove home slowly, taking the long route through neighborhoods. Eleanor and I used to walk together. The autumn leaves were beginning to turn gold and crimson against a pale blue sky. I thought about all the seasons we had shared, all the changes we had weathered together. She had been my compass for 43 years. Now I was learning to navigate alone, guided only by the letter she had left behind that evening. I retrieved the small device I had purchased at the electronics store. It was a motion-activated camera, no larger than a deck of cards, designed to blend into a bookshelf or sit unnoticed among ordinary objects. I had researched my options carefully, choosing a model that recorded to an internal memory card rather than requiring an internet connection. I did not want anyone to know I was watching. I placed the camera on the third shelf of my bookcase, nestled between a row of engineering manuals and a framed photograph of Eleanor and me on our wedding day. The lens pointed directly at the entrance, capturing anyone who walked through. The door, I tested it twice, walking in and out of the apartment, reviewing the footage on my laptop to ensure the angle was correct. When I was satisfied, I turned off the lights and went to bed. The camera sat in the darkness, silent and patient, waiting for whatever would come next. 3 days passed. Before I returned to Daniel's house, I wanted to give him time to let the anger from my message settle into something more manageable. I still believed, despite everything that my son might choose differently, if given the chance, I still hoped that somewhere beneath Vanessa's influence, the boy I had raised still existed, waiting for permission to emerge. It was a Thursday afternoon when I drove back. The weather had turned gray, clouds hanging low over the rooftops. The kind of day Eleanor used to call thinking weather. I parked across the street a few houses down where I could see Daniel's driveway without being immediately visible from the front windows. Vanessa's car was there again, but this time I didn't leave. I had driven too far to turn back without trying. I walked up the path, slowly rehearsing what I would say. I wanted to be calm, reasonable. The father Daniel remembered from before his mother's death. I wanted to offer an olive branch a chance to repair what had been broken. But as I approached the front door, I heard voices drifting through an open window on the side of the house. The same window that had been cracked open during my last visit. I stopped. The voices were clearer now, close enough to distinguish words. I knew I should keep walking, should knock on the door and announce myself like a decent person, but something held me in place. Some instinct born of 6 months of doubt and documentation. I moved closer to the window, staying out of sight, and listened. Vanessa spoke first. He changed the locks. Can you believe it? After everything we've done, he changed the locks. Like we're strangers. He's being ridiculous. I waited for Daniel to defend me. I waited for him to say that I had a right to privacy, that his wife had overstepped, that perhaps they should respect my wishes. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then my son spoke. My father, he's not the one making decisions anymore since Mom died. He just exists. He goes through the motions, but he's not really there. Give it time. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not the one making decisions anymore, just exists. I pressed my hand against the wall of the house to steady myself, my heart pounding in my ears. Vanessa's voice came again, lower now, almost conspiratorial. That apartment is too big for one person. 2 bedrooms, a study, all that space going to waste. If he would just be reasonable, just wait until he's weaker. Daniel said he can't hold out forever. Eventually he'll need help. And then we can have a real conversation about his living situation. I stood frozen beneath that window, unable to move, unable to breathe. The word echoed in my mind, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward in every direction. Weaker, my son was waiting for me to become weaker, not out of concern for my health, not out of love for his father, but because weakness would make me easier to manage, easier to move, easier to strip of everything I had built. This was not dismissal. This was not the casual cruelty of a daughter-in-law who did not know better. This was a plan spoken aloud in the safety of their own home between a husband and wife who had calculated the trajectory of my decline and were simply waiting for gravity to do its work. I thought of all the times Daniel had stood silent while Vanessa criticized me. I thought of his averted eyes, his shrugged shoulders, his mumbled agreements. I had attributed his behavior to weakness, to the difficulty of being caught between a wife and a father. But weakness was not the same as complicity. Weakness did not speak of waiting until someone was weaker. My son had not been caught in the middle. He had chosen his side long ago. He had simply lacked the courage to tell me I did not knock on the door. I did not confront them. I turned and walked back to my car. My footsteps silent on the concrete path, my face betraying nothing to anyone who might have been watching. I drove home slowly, taking streets I had not traveled in years, letting the unfamiliar routes give me time to process what I had heard. I didn't cry. The tears I had shed over Eleanor's letter had emptied something inside me, leaving a space that now filled with something harder, something clearer. I understood now why Eleanor had written that letter. She had seen what I refused to see. She had known that love could be corrupted, that family could become a weapon. that the people closest to you were sometimes the ones most capable of betrayal. Her letter had been a warning. My son's words were confirmation. By the time I reached my apartment, the gray afternoon had darkened toward evening. I checked the new locks on both doors. Running my fingers along the brass mechanisms I had installed just days before I powered on my laptop and verified that the camera on the bookshelf was recording properly, its small red light blinking in the shadows between my engineering manuals. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. I sat down in my chair facing Eleanor's photograph and let the silence settle around me. I was not angry. Anger would have been easier, would have given me something to push against someone to blame what I felt. Instead was clarity, cold and absolute. Like the moment in an engineering calculation when all the variables align and you see exactly where the stress will fracture the beam. The trap was set not for revenge. I had no interest in punishment for its own sake. But the truth had been hiding in the shadows of my home for 6 months, and I was done waiting for it to reveal itself. If Vanessa came again, I would know. If she searched my desk, my cabinets, my private papers, I would have proof. And when the time came, I would decide what to do with that proof. Eleanor had told me to walk away, but first I needed to know exactly what I was walking away from. 2 weeks passed. Without incident, I continued my morning walks, maintained my routines, and checked the camera footage each evening before bed. The recording showed nothing but empty rooms, sunlight shifting across the floor, the occasional flicker of shadows when clouds passed overhead. Part of me wondered if Vanessa had finally accepted defeat, if my new locks and clear boundaries had been enough to deter her. But I knew better. I'd heard her voice through that window. I'd heard my son's complicity. People who wait for you to become weaker do not give up easily. The building manager, a meticulous woman named Patricia, called me on a Tuesday morning. She sounded uncomfortable, choosing her words with the care of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Mr. Lawson, I wanted to let you know that someone contacted our office yesterday, a woman claiming to be your daughter-in-law. She said she was worried about your safety and asked if we could let her into your apartment to check on you." I felt my grip tighten on the phone. "What did you tell her?" "I told her we couldn't do that. You left explicit instructions that no one should be given access without your direct authorization." She was persistent. She called back twice and even came to the office in person. But I held firm. "I just wanted you to know in case she tries another approach." I thanked Patricia and asked her to continue refusing any requests regardless of how concerned the caller might sound. She assured me she would. After I hung up, I sat for a long time, staring at the wall, thinking about the lengths Vanessa was willing to go. She had tried the key, she had tried the management. What would she try next? I did not have to wait long to find out. Over the following days, I noticed small signs that someone was probing for weaknesses. A neighbor I barely knew. A younger woman who had moved in 6 months ago suddenly became friendly. She stopped me in this hallway to chat, asked questions about my routine, mentioned that she had met a lovely woman named Vanessa, who was so worried about me. I kept my answers vague and my expression neutral, but I understood what was happening. Vanessa was gathering intelligence, building relationships, looking for any crack in the walls I had constructed. The crack she found was the fire escape. My apartment had a small balcony overlooking the courtyard, accessible through a sliding glass door. I rarely used the adjacent unit occupied by a tenant who traveled frequently for work, shared a connecting fire escape platform. Someone agile enough could climb from one balcony to the other without much difficulty. I had never considered this a security risk. I had never imagined anyone would be desperate enough to try. But desperation, I was learning, had its own logic. Daniel called me on a Friday evening, his voice carrying a tension I had not heard before. He stumbled through the usual pleasantries, asking about my health, commenting on the weather circling around. Something he could not quite bring himself to say, Dad. I wanted to check in. He finally managed. Vanessa's been stressed lately. We're going through some things. I waited for him to elaborate. He did not. What kind of things? I asked. Just financial stuff? Nothing serious? She's been working on some investments, and they haven't panned out the way she hoped. It's put a strain on things. The word investments hung in the air between us. I thought about all the times Vanessa had asked about my finances, all the times she had searched my desk and filing cabinet. I thought about the brochures for assisted living, the questions about whether I needed help managing my affairs. A picture was beginning to form, hazy but increasingly coherent. Do you need help? I asked. If you're having money troubles, I could. No, Daniel said quickly. Too quickly. No, we're fine. I just wanted you to know. In case Vanessa seems a little on edge, she doesn't mean anything by it. He changed the subject after that, asking about my walks, my health, whether I'd given any more thought to the assisted living brochures. I gave non-committal answers and let him fill the silences when the call ended. I wrote everything down in my notebook, the date, the time, the words he had used, financial stuff, investments that hadn't panned out, a strain on things. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew it mattered that night. I went to bed earlier than usual, exhausted by the weight of constant vigilance. I fell asleep quickly, dreaming of Eleanor, of walks we had taken decades ago, of a time when family meant safety instead of suspicion. The sound woke me at 2 a.m. It was subtle, barely louder than the settling of the building. But my senses had become finely tuned over months of watching and waiting. A scrape, a creak, something that did not belong to the normal symphony of night sounds. I lay still listening, my heart beginning to pound. Then I remembered the camera. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and opened the app that connected to the motion-activated device on my bookshelf. The screen glowed in the darkness, showing a live feed of my living room. For a moment, I saw nothing unusual. Then the image shifted slightly, responding to movement at the edge of the frame. Someone was on the balcony, a shadow, human-shaped, pressed against the glass of the sliding door. I watched as the figure tested the handle, found it locked, and began to work at the latch with something thin and metallic. I did not move. I did not call out. I simply watched the camera recording everything, as Vanessa finally revealed exactly how far she was willing to go. I watched through the phone screen as she worked at the latch. Her movements were practiced, methodical. The technique of someone who had researched how to bypass a simple lock. The balcony door was old, installed decades before modern security became a concern, and I had never thought to reinforce it, that oversight was about to cost her everything. At 3:02 a.m., the door slid open. Vanessa stepped inside, her silhouette framed against the faint glow of the courtyard lights. Behind her, she paused at the threshold, listening, waiting for any sign that she had been detected. The apartment remained dark and silent. Satisfied, she pulled out her phone and activated the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the living room. As she moved toward my desk, she didn't know about the security system. I had installed it 3 days after changing the locks. A silent alarm connected to a professional monitoring service. The motion sensors were positioned throughout the apartment, invisible in the shadows, calibrated to detect movement in specific zones. When Vanessa crossed the threshold into the living room, she triggered the first sensor. The system began its silent countdown, waiting for a code that would never come. I lay in bed watching through the camera feed, counting the seconds, 15, 20, 25. Vanessa reached my desk and began opening drawers, her flashlight casting wild shadows across the walls. As she searched, she pulled out files, rifled through papers, set aside documents that caught her attention. She was looking for something specific, something she believed I had hidden, something valuable enough to justify breaking into a locked apartment in the middle of the night. The countdown reached 0. The lights came on all at once, every bulb in the apartment blazing to life, as if the sun had risen inside my walls. A siren screamed from the control panel in the hallway, loud enough to wake the entire floor, loud enough to shatter the silence Vanessa had counted on. She stumbled backward, dropping her phone, her face frozen in an expression of pure terror. For a moment she stood paralyzed, blinded by the sudden brightness, deafened by the alarm. Then she began to move frantically, searching for the control panel, pressing buttons at random, trying to silence the sound that was announcing her crime to the entire building. She didn't know the code. She never would. I stayed in bed listening to the chaos unfold through the thin walls of my bedroom. I heard doors opening in the hallway, neighbors shouting questions, footsteps pounding on the floor above. Someone was calling 911, someone else was demanding to know what was happening through it all. The siren continued its relentless scream, a mechanical witness that could not be silenced or bribed or persuaded to look the other way. The police arrived in 8 minutes. I heard them before I saw them. The heavy boots in the hallway, the authoritative voices demanding that everyone stay back. I got out of bed slowly, put on my robe, and waited. There was no need to rush. Everything was proceeding exactly as I had anticipated. A knock came at my door, firm and professional. I opened it to find a uniformed officer standing in the hallway, his hand resting on his belt, his eyes scanning past me into the apartment behind him. I could see Vanessa sitting on the floor near my desk, her wrists in handcuffs, her face streaked with tears. Another officer stood over her taking notes. Mr. Lawson, the first officer, asked. His nameplate read, "Carter, I'm Officer Miles Carter. We received a silent alarm alert from your residence. Can you tell me what happened here?" "That woman broke into my apartment," I said calmly. "She entered through the balcony door without my knowledge or permission." Vanessa's head snapped up. "That's not true. I'm his daughter-in-law. I was just checking on him." Her voice was high and desperate, the voice of someone watching her carefully constructed story collapse around her. "Tell them, Dad, tell them this is a misunderstanding." I said nothing. Officer Carter turned to look at her, his expression neutral but skeptical. "Ma'am, is this your residence?" The question hung in the air. Vanessa opened her mouth, closed. It opened it again. She could not answer. Yes, she could not claim ownership of a space that had never belonged to her. She could not explain why a concerned daughter-in-law would climb a fire escape at 3 a.m. to enter an apartment she had been explicitly told to stay away from. "I have a key," she said weakly. "I've always had a key. The locks were changed." I said 2 weeks ago. She was informed in writing that she was no longer permitted to enter without my presence or permission. I have the text messages saved. Officer Carter studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He stepped away and spoke into his radio, his voice low but audible in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the apartment dispatch. "This is Carter, possible trespassing in progress at the Lawson residence, requesting homeowner verification and additional units for documentation." He turned back to me, pulling out his phone. "Mr. Lawson, I'm going to need to verify some information with you. Can I call you directly to confirm your identity and statement?" "Of course." I said. My phone rang seconds later, the sound cutting through the lingering echo of the silenced alarm. I looked at the screen, saw the number, and answered on the first ring, "This is Richard Lawson." I said, "I've been expecting this call." Officer Carter finished the verification call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. He looked at me with a mixture of professional detachment and something that might have been curiosity. In his years on the force, he had probably seen countless domestic disputes. But I suspected this one was different. Most intruders did not wear designer clothes and claimed to be family Mr. Lawson. He said, "I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight." Are you willing to provide a statement? I am, I said. But first, there's something you should see. I walked past him into the living room, moving slowly, deliberately the way I had learned to move through difficult conversations over 6 decades of life. Vanessa was still on the floor near my desk, her hands cuffed behind her back. Her mascara smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks when she saw me. She struggled to her feet, nearly losing her balance in the process. "Dad, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Tell them this is a misunderstanding. I was worried about you. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I did not. Look at her? I could not if I looked at her face. I might see something human beneath the manipulation. Something that would make what I was about to do more difficult than it needed to be. Instead, I walked to the bookshelf and retrieved the small camera that had been hidden there for months, nestled between my engineering manuals and the photograph from my wedding day, Officer Carter. I said, handing him the device. "This camera has been recording my apartment for the past 4 months. It's motion activated and timestamps every entry. What you'll find on it is documentation of 15 unauthorized entries, all occurring after I sent written notice to both my son and his wife that they were no longer permitted to enter without my presence or permission." Carter took the camera and examined it, turning it over in his hands. 15 entries, 15 that I captured on video. There were more before I installed the camera. I have a written log of 27 incidents total, along with copies of the text messages I sent, establishing my boundaries. I pulled my phone from my robe pocket and opened the message thread. Here, dated 6 weeks ago. I told them explicitly, "Do not enter when I am not present. If you need to see me, call in first." Carter scrolled through the messages, his expression hardening. As he read behind him, the other officer had retrieved a laptop from the patrol car and was setting it up on my dining table. Within minutes, they had connected the camera and begun reviewing the footage. The videos played in silence. Vanessa entering through the front door with a key that should not have existed. Vanessa opening drawers, searching files, photographing documents with her phone. Vanessa standing in my bedroom doorway, looking at Eleanor's jewelry box. With an expression I could only describe as calculation. Each clip was time-stamped, each one recorded after the date of my written warning, each one proving beyond any doubt that this was not a misunderstanding or a one-time lapse in judgment. "This is not the first time," I said quietly. "I gave her written notice to stop. She didn't?" Carter nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He turned to the other officer and spoke in a low voice, too quiet for me to hear. Then he approached Vanessa, who had gone very still, her eyes fixed on the laptop screen, where her own image moved through my apartment like a ghost before he could speak. The front door burst open. Daniel stood in the doorway, his shirt untucked, his hair disheveled, his face a mask of panic. He must have driven here the moment he realized something was wrong. Speeding through empty streets, praying he would arrive in time to fix whatever had broken. But there was nothing left to fix. "What's going on?" he demanded, pushing past the officer at the door. "Dad." Vanessa, his eyes swept the room, taking in the handcuffs, the police, the laptop still playing footage of his wife's crimes officer. There must be some mistake. My wife would never. "Sir, I need you to stay calm," Carter said, holding up a hand. "Are you Daniel Lawson?" "Yes, I'm his son." "What is happening here?" Carter gestured toward the laptop. "Perhaps you should see this." Daniel walked to the table as if moving through water, each step slower than the last. He watched the footage in silence, his face draining of color, as clip after clip played out before him. Vanessa entering Vanessa, searching Vanessa, photographing documents that did not belong to her. When the final video ended, Daniel stood motionless, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Dad, I swear." "I didn't know she was still said you knew." I said the words came out flat, without anger, without accusation. Simple fact, you gave her the key. You defended her when I asked for boundaries. You told her to wait until I was weaker. Daniel flinched as if I had struck him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. There was nothing he could say. No explanation. That would erase what we both knew to be true. Officer Carter. Cleared his throat, ma'am, he said, turning to Vanessa. I'm placing you under arrest for criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Vanessa began to sob, her shoulders, shaking, her carefully constructed composure finally crumbling. Daniel stood frozen between us, his wife in handcuffs on one side, his silent father on the other. I watched him struggle, watched him search for a way out, a middle ground, a compromise that would let him avoid choosing. But there was no middle ground, there never had been. He had simply pretended otherwise until pretending was no longer possible. The police took Vanessa away in the back of a patrol car. I watched from my window as the red and blue lights faded down the street, disappearing around the corner like the end of a chapter. I'd been waiting months to close. Daniel stood on the sidewalk below his hands, hanging limp at his side, staring at the empty space where his wife had been. He didn't look up at my window. Perhaps he could not bear to the formal charges. Came the next morning, Officer Carter called to inform me that Vanessa had been booked and processed, and that the district attorney's office would be reviewing the case criminal trespass class a misdemeanor with the possibility of elevation to a felony given the repeated nature of the violations and the forced entry through the balcony door. If convicted, she faced up to 1 year in jail and a permanent criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. Bail had been set at $5. 000. I thanked Carter for the update and asked him to keep me informed of any developments he assured me he would. When the call ended, I sat in my chair and looked at Eleanor's photograph at the smile she had worn on our 40th anniversary at the lighthouse, rising behind us against the summer sky. I had done what she asked, I had protected my dignity. But the victory felt hollow, like winning a war that had destroyed everything worth saving. Daniel called me 3 times that morning. I let each call go to voicemail. His messages grew increasingly desperate, his voice cracking as he pleaded for me to answer, to help, to explain what I wanted him to do. I didn't call back. There was nothing left to explain. He had made his choices over months and years, small decisions that had accumulated into the wreckage now surrounding him. I could not undo those choices. I could only watch as he faced their consequences around noon. I went for my usual walk. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves crunching beneath my feet. As I followed the familiar route through the neighborhood when I returned, I saw Daniel's car parked outside my building. He was sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands, looking like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. I approached, slowly giving him time to notice me. When he looked up, his eyes were red, rimmed, his face pale and drawn. He stood and took a step toward me, then stopped as if unsure whether he was still permitted to come closer. Dad, he said, I need your help. I waited. The bail is 5 behind 000. I went to the bank this morning to withdraw the money, but my card was declined. I checked the account, and there's almost nothing left. I don't understand. There should be more. There should be a lot more. His voice broke on the last word. I called Vanessa, but she won't answer. I don't know what's happening. I studied my son's face, searching for some sign of the boy I had raised, the young man who had once looked at me with trust and admiration. All I saw was confusion and fear. The expression of someone who had built his life on a foundation he never thought to examine. I think you need to check your own house before you worry about mine, I said. Daniel blinked. What does that mean? It means that whatever is happening with your money is not my problem to solve. You chose to give Vanessa control over your life. You chose to stand silent while she violated my boundaries. You chose to wait until I was weaker. I let the words settle between us. Now you're discovering what those choices have cost you. Cannot help you with that. Only you can, Dad? Please. She's my wife. Whatever she did, I can't just leave her in jail, then find another way to post bail, sell something, borrow from a friend, but do not ask me to pay for the consequences of her actions. I have spent 6 months paying for them already. Daniel stared at me, his mouth working silently, searching for an argument that would change my mind. He found none. After a long moment, he turned and walked back to his car, his shoulders hunched, his footsteps heavy on the pavement. I watched him drive away and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, just the quiet emptiness of a relationship that had been hollowed out from the inside. That evening, I received one more call from Daniel this time. I answered Dad, he said, and his voice was different now, smaller. Frightened. I've been looking at our bank statements, the ones Vanessa always handled. I never checked them myself. I trusted her. I said nothing. There are withdrawals I don't recognize, transfers to accounts. I've never heard of loans taken out in my name that I never signed for. He paused, and I heard him swallow hard. Dad. I think she's been stealing from us for me for years. I closed my eyes and thought of Eleanor's letter. I know our daughter-in-law. I've seen how she looks at our apartment, at what we've built. My wife had seen the truth long before any of us. She had tried to warn me, and now Daniel was discovering what I had learned months ago, that the person he trusted most had never deserved that trust. How much I asked? I don't know yet, tens of thousands at least, maybe more. His voice cracked again. I don't know what to do. Then I suggest you find out, I said, start with the statements. Follow the money. And when you understand what she's done, you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be. I hung up before he could respond. There was nothing more I could say. Daniel had finally opened his eyes, but the journey ahead was his alone to walk. All I could do was wait and see whether my son would find the courage to face the truth, or whether he would retreat into the comfortable blindness that had brought him here. The numbers I suspected would not add up. And when Daniel finally saw the full extent of Vanessa's betrayal, he would have to choose who he wanted to become. 3 days passed before I heard from Daniel again. 3 days of silence, of waiting, of wondering what he had found in those bank statements and whether the truth had broken him or set him free. I didn't call him. I didn't visit whatever storm was raging through his life. He needed to face it alone before he could face me. When he finally appeared at my door, I barely recognized him. The man standing in my hallway looked like a shadow of my son. His face gaunt, his eyes hollow. His clothes wrinkled, as if he had slept in them for days. He did not wait for an invitation. He walked past me into the living room and sank onto the couch, staring at the floor with the blank expression of someone who had seen too much to process $47. 000, he said without preamble. That's how much she took loans in my name, credit cards? I never applied for transfers to accounts that don't exist anymore. He laughed a harsh sound without humor. She forged my signature, Dad, on everything. I compared the documents to my actual handwriting. It's close, but it's not mine. She practiced until she got it right. I sat down across from him and waited. There was more coming. I could see it in the way he held himself. The tension in his shoulders, the tremor in his hands. I confronted her. He continued, after she made bail someone from her office, paid it, I don't even know who she came home. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just spent 2 nights in jail for breaking into my father's apartment. He shook his head slowly. I showed her the statements. I showed her the forged signatures I asked her to explain. Daniel's jaw tightened. She said she did it for our family. She said if the investments had worked out, we'd be rich. She said I should be thanking her for trying to build something instead of blaming her for taking a risk. His voice cracked. She wasn't sorry, Dad. She was angry. Angry that I found out. Angry that her plans didn't work. She looked at me like I was the one who had betrayed her. I thought of all the times Vanessa had smiled at me, had asked about my health, had offered to help with my finances. I thought of the brochures for assisted living, the questions about my investments, the methodical searches through my desk and filing cabinet. The picture that had been forming for months finally came into focus. She was searching my apartment for money. I said it was not a question. Daniel nodded miserably. She was desperate. The debts were piling up faster than she could cover them. She thought maybe you had cash hidden somewhere, or documents she could use or something she could sell. Without you noticing, he looked up at me, his eyes wet. All those times she said she was checking on you. She was looking for a way out of the hole she dug. The concern was never real. It was always about what she could take. The confirmation should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like grief. I had suspected Vanessa's motives for months, had documented her intrusions, had prepared for exactly this moment. But hearing my son speak the words aloud, hearing him finally acknowledge what I had known all along, brought no satisfaction, only sadness for the years we had lost, the trust that had been squandered, the family that had been hollowed out by one woman's greed. What are you going to do? I asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment when he spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. The debt is in my name. I'm legally responsible for all of it. Even if I press charges for fraud, it could take years to sort out, and there's no guarantee I'd win. He rubbed his face with both hands. My wife is a criminal. My father won't speak to me. My money is gone. I don't know what's left. I did not offer comfort. I did not tell him everything would be all right. Those would have been lies, and Daniel had been surrounded by lies. For long enough, you have a choice to make. I said instead, the same choice you've had all along. You can keep protecting the life you built with her, or you can start building something honest, but you cannot do both. Daniel sat in silence, absorbing my words. Then he stood, walked to the door, and paused with his hand on the knob. Dad, he said without turning around, I need to see you, really see you not like this. Not in crisis. I need to sit with you and talk the way we used to before Mom died. His voice broke. Please. I don't have anyone else left. I looked at my son, at the broken man standing in my doorway, and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it, distant and fragile, waiting to see what he would do next. Call me tomorrow, I said, we'll talk. Then Daniel called the next morning, as I had asked. His voice was hoarse, stripped of the confident tone he had carried for years, reduced to something raw and uncertain. We agreed to meet at my apartment that afternoon. No Vanessa, no excuses, just the two of us. Father and son, for the first time in longer than I could remember. When he arrived, I barely recognized the man who walked through my door. The exhaustion I had seen the day before had deepened into something more permanent, carved into the lines around his eyes, the slump of his shoulders, the way he moved like someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear. He had aged a decade in less than a week. The confident professional, the dutiful husband, the son who always deferred to his wife, all of those masks had fallen away, leaving only a 45-year-old man who looked utterly lost. He sat across from me in the living room, in the same chair where Vanessa had once spread her assisted living brochures across my table. The irony was not lost on me. He folded his hands in his lap and stared at them for a long moment before speaking. I'm sorry, he said. Finally, I didn't know it had gotten this bad. I didn't know she was capable of Hannah. You knew the words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften them. Daniel looked up startled, and I held his gaze without flinching. You knew I repeated maybe not the details, maybe not the full extent, but you knew something was wrong. You knew she was entering my apartment without permission. You knew she was searching through my things. You knew I had asked her to stop, and you knew she hadn't. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. You chose not to see. That's not the same as not knowing. Daniel's face crumpled. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, to offer some explanation that would absolve him of responsibility. But no words came, because there were no words. We both knew the truth, and the truth did not require debate. There's something I need to show you. I said I went to Eleanor's drawer and retrieved the letter she had left for me. The paper was soft from handling the creases worn from the many times I had unfolded and refolded it over the past weeks. I carried it back to my chair and sat down, holding it carefully, as if it might crumble at any moment. Your mother wrote this before she died. I said she left it for me, hidden in a place where I would find it only when I needed it most. I looked at Daniel, at the confusion and fear in his eyes. She knew, son. She knew what Vanessa was. And she tried to warn me. I unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. Richard, if you're reading this, you're probably feeling alone. I know our son loves you, but I also know our daughter-in-law. I've seen how she looks at our apartment and what we've built. Don't let anyone take your dignity. If your boundaries are violated, walk away. Don't explain, don't beg for understanding, just walk away. I believe in you. The words hung in the air between us. Daniel sat, frozen, his face pale, his breathing shallow. I watched him process what he had heard, watched the realization dawn that his mother had seen through him too. Eleanor had not trusted her own son to protect his. Father, she had written this letter because she knew Daniel would fail, knew he would stand silent, knew he would choose the path of least resistance until there was nothing left to resist. Mom wrote that Daniel whispered she did. She knew before any of this happened. She knew your mother saw people clearly. It was one of her greatest gifts. I folded the letter and set it aside. She saw Vanessa for what she was, and she saw you for what you were becoming. Daniel broke then not the controlled tears of a man trying to maintain composure, but the raw, heaving sobs of someone whose entire understanding of himself had shattered. He wept for his mother, for the trust she had withheld, for the faith she had placed in me instead of him. He wept for the years he had spent deferring to his wife, for the boundaries he had allowed her to cross, for the father he had failed to defend. I let him cry. I didn't comfort him. Comfort would have been a kindness he had not yet earned. Instead, I spoke the truth he needed to. Hear the truth that had been building inside me for months. I lost your mother, I said quietly. That was the hardest thing I've ever survived, but I did survive it. I learned to live with the absence, to carry the grief, to wake up every morning in a bed that was too empty and keep going anyway. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. But you, Daniel, you lost my respect. And that was your choice every time you stood silent while she diminished me. You chose her comfort over my dignity. Every time you looked away when I asked for help. You told me that keeping peace with your wife mattered more than keeping faith with your father. Daniel looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes swollen and red. I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter. Actions matter. You acted like a coward, and I lost respect for you. That is the truth, and no amount of apology will change it. The words were harsh, but they were honest. Daniel needed honesty now more than he needed comfort. He had spent years wrapped in Vanessa's lies. The least I could give him was the clarity of truth. He sat in silence for a long time, absorbing what I had said. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier, though still fragile around the edges. I'm leaving her. He said, I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked at me. His expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Dad, can I come stay with you? Just until I get back on my feet, I don't have anywhere else to go." The question hung in the air between us, fragile and desperate. I looked at my son, at the broken man sitting across from me, and felt the weight of 45 years pressing down on my shoulders. I had raised him, I had taught him to ride a bicycle, helped him with his homework, walked him down the aisle at his wedding. I had been there for every milestone, every stumble, every moment, when he needed someone to catch him before he fell, and now he was asking me to catch him again, to open my door and my home, to provide the safety net he had always assumed would be there. I thought of Eleanor's letter, "Don't live someone else's life for them," for years. I had not understood what she meant. I had read those words as advice about self-preservation, about protecting my own boundaries against those who would violate them. But sitting here now looking at my son's expectant face, I finally understood the deeper meaning. Eleanor had not just been warning me about Vanessa. She had been warning me about Daniel too. About the danger of loving someone so much that you shield them from the consequences of their own choices. No, I said the word fell between us like a stone into still water. Daniel blinked, confusion flickering across his face, as if he had not heard correctly. "What? No," I repeated, "you cannot stay here." Daniel stared at me with his mouth slightly open, his eyes searching my face for some sign that I was joking, testing him, playing some kind of cruel game. He found nothing. I kept my expression calm, my voice steady, even as my heart ached with the effort of what I was doing. "Dad, I don't understand. I have nowhere else to go. Vanessa took everything. The house is mortgaged beyond what it's worth. I can't afford rent on my own, not with the debt she left me." His voice rose, panic creeping in at the edges. "I'm your son. You can't just turn me away. I'm not turning you away. I'm refusing to rescue you. What's the difference?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, looking directly into his eyes. "Son, I love you. I have loved you since the moment you were born, and I will love you until the day I die. But you are 45 years old? You don't need an apartment. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet." Daniel shook his head as if he could physically reject what I was saying. "I don't understand. You've always been there for me when I needed help with college. You were there when I needed money for the wedding. You were there. Why is this different? Because those were investments in your future. This would be enabling your past." I paused, gathering my thoughts, wanting to say this exactly right. "Your mother wrote something else in that letter. Something I didn't read to you before she wrote. Don't live someone else's life for them." I didn't understand it at first. I thought she was talking about Vanessa, about not letting someone else control my decisions. But now I realize she was also talking about you. Daniel's face crumpled. "What does that mean?" "It means I spent too many years making things easy for you every time you faced a hard choice. I was there to soften the landing. Every time you made a mistake, I was there to clean it up. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was showing love." I shook my head slowly, but I wasn't. I was teaching you that consequences don't apply to you. I was teaching you that someone would always be there to fix what you broke. "That's not fair," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "I didn't ask for any of this. Vanessa? Vanessa made her choices, but you made yours too. You chose to let her handle the finances. Without oversight, you chose to stand silent when she violated my boundaries. You chose to wait until I was weaker instead of standing up for what was right. I let the words settle before continuing. Those were your choices, Daniel. Not hers, yours. And now you need to live with the consequences." Daniel sat in stunned silence. I could see him struggling to process what was happening, to reconcile the father who had always said yes with the man, now saying no. His world had already been shattered by Vanessa's betrayal. Now I was refusing to help him pick up the pieces. "I will always be here if you need to talk," I said, softening my tone slightly. "If you want to have dinner, call me. If you need advice, I'll listen. If you're in genuine danger, I will help, but I will not save you from the consequences of choices you made. That's not love. Daniel, that's enabling, and I enabled you long enough. So what am I supposed to do?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Figure it out. Find a small apartment you can afford. Get a second job if you need to talk to a financial advisor about managing the debt. Do whatever it takes to rebuild your life from the ground up." I paused. "You're capable of more than you think. You just never had to prove it, because I was always there to make things easier." "Well, I'm not making things easier anymore. It's time for you to discover who you are when no one is there to catch you." Daniel sat motionless for a long moment. I watched emotions flicker across his face: anger, disbelief, hurt, and finally something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. He did not argue further. Perhaps he knew somewhere deep inside that I was right, or perhaps he was simply too exhausted to fight. He stood slowly, his movements heavy with defeat. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the knob, his back to me. I thought he might say something of final plea, an angry accusation, a grudging acknowledgement. But he said nothing. He simply opened the door and stepped through it. I didn't call out. I didn't tell him to wait. Did not change my mind. Did not offer the compromise he was hoping for. I sat in my chair and watched my son walk away, his shoulders hunched, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded into silence. The door closed quietly behind him. The apartment felt emptier than it had in months. I looked at Eleanor's photograph, at the smile that had guided me through the darkest moments of my life, and I whispered the only words that felt true: "I hope I did the right thing." The photograph did not answer, but somewhere in the silence, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. And I knew that Eleanor, wherever she was, understood 6 months can change everything. 6 months can tear down what took years to build, or it can lay the foundation for something new. In the half year since Daniel walked out of my apartment, I watched both kinds of change unfold: destruction and renewal, endings and beginnings, the slow turning of seasons that carries life forward whether we are ready or not. Vanessa's trial concluded in early spring. The evidence was overwhelming: the camera footage, the bank records, the forged signatures, the testimony of neighbors and building staff who had witnessed her comings and goings. She pleaded guilty to criminal trespass and fraud, hoping for leniency. The judge was not moved. She received 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and a court order to repay every dollar she had stolen from Daniel. Her name appeared in the local newspaper, a small article buried in the back pages, but enough to ensure that everyone in their community knew what she had done within weeks. She lost her job within a month. She had filed for divorce. Or perhaps Daniel had filed first. I never asked for the details by summer. She had moved away, destination unknown. Her reputation in ruins. Her schemes collapsed around her like a house built on sand. I did not attend the trial. I did not need to watch her fall. The satisfaction I might have felt had long since faded into something quieter, something closer to indifference. Vanessa had been a storm that passed through my life, leaving damage in her wake, but storms end. What matters is what remains when the clouds clear. Daniel found a small apartment on the other side of town, a one-bedroom unit in a building without charm or distinction. He took a second job to manage the debt, working weekends at a hardware store where no one knew his history or his shame. We spoke every Sunday, brief conversations that lasted 10 or 15 minutes, covering the small details of our separate lives. He told me about his work, his apartment, the cooking skills he was slowly developing out of necessity. I told him about my walks, my garden, the books I was reading, We did not discuss Vanessa or the trial or the money she had stolen. Those wounds were still too fresh to touch, but something had changed in my son. I could hear it in his voice, a steadiness that had not been there before, a willingness to sit with discomfort instead of running. From it, he was learning slowly what it meant to face consequences without someone to shield him. He was discovering strengths he had never needed to use. I didn't know if we would ever fully repair what had been broken between us, but for the first time in years, I believed it might be possible. My own life settled into a rhythm I had almost forgotten. I watered Eleanor's lilies every morning, watching them bloom and fade and bloom again. With the turning of the seasons, I took my walks at 7 or following the familiar route through the neighborhood, nodding to the same faces, breathing the same air I had breathed for decades. Susan Whitmore joined me, sometimes falling into step beside me without needing to fill the silence with conversation. We walked together like old friends, comfortable in each other's presence, grateful for the company, without demanding more than either of us could give. I was not lonely. That was the surprise I had not expected. For 2 years after Eleanor's death, I had feared loneliness more than almost anything. The empty apartment, the silent meals, the long evenings, with no one to share them, but loneliness, I discovered, is not the same as being alone. Loneliness is wanting connection and finding none. Being alone is a choice, a decision to live on your own terms, to fill your days with meaning that does not depend on anyone else's presence. I had made that choice, and in making it, I had found a peace I had not known was possible. On a quiet morning in late autumn, I took Eleanor's letter from the drawer where I had kept it for nearly a year. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with my fingers, and read her words. One final time. They had guided me through the darkest months of my life, had given me the courage to protect my dignity. When everything I loved seemed to be slipping away, I owed her more than I could ever repay. When I finished reading, I folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. I stored it in the drawer beside the library card, in the jewelry box, the small treasures of a life we had built together. Then I closed the drawer and whispered to the photograph on my shelf, "You were right." I walked away, and I'm still here. I made my coffee and carried it to the window, settling into my chair as the first light of dawn crept over the rooftops. The sky shifted from gray to gold, the world waking slowly around me. I did not need revenge. I did not need reconciliation. I had something better, something I had earned through months of patience and pain and quiet determination. I had peace. The apartment is quiet, but for the first time in years, the silence does not feel like absence. It feels like freedom. Every story leaves a mark, and this one is no exception. Richard Lawson did not set out to destroy his daughter-in-law or teach his son a lesson. He simply wanted what every person deserves: respect, privacy, and the right to live on his own terms. When those boundaries were violated, he did not retaliate with anger or cruelty. He responded with patience, documentation, and quiet resolve. He let the truth speak for itself. And in the end, the truth was enough. Eleanor's letter was more than a warning. It was a gift. A final act of love from a woman who knew her husband better than he knew himself. She understood that kindness could be exploited, that family could become a weapon, and that sometimes walking away is the bravest thing a person can do. Richard honored her wisdom, and in doing so, he reclaimed the dignity that had been slowly stripped away. This story reminds us that boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are declarations of self-worth, statements that say, "I matter, my peace matters, and I will not sacrifice either for the comfort of those who refuse to respect them." If this story moved you, we would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone who mistook your kindness for weakness? Have you faced the painful choice between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your story might be the one that helps someone else find the courage to stand their ground. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more stories of resilience, justice, and the quiet power of self-respect.